Well, good morning. Welcome. I'm Mark the Pond Guy. I started playing in the ponds about 30 years ago. So 1989 was our first pond we built at my mom and dad's house. So they're outside the tent right there now. So hi, Mom and Dad. There you go. I got my love of gardening from my mom. She loved to garden in the backyard, and so that's where I just started tinkering around. And I was on my way to Penn State studying aerospace engineering, and changed directions and studied landscape architecture down at West Virginia University. And in the middle of all of that, started playing around landscaping, and eventually that turned into more than just a part-time job. It became a full-time job, and today we have Splash Supply Company, which is our retail and wholesale side of the business, and then we have a company called The Garden's Edge, which is our install side of the business. And so today I play in the mud for a living all over the East Coast. We have wholesale customers out in Long Island, Washington, D.C., Poughkeepsie, New York, all over the kind of the Northeast region. My day-to-day job around here is running around, keeping our crews in shape, and designing projects for projects all over the place. My wife Becky, you'll see running around here, handles the retail operations and the wholesale side of the business, and I just generally create chaos wherever I go. So they allow me to stop by the store about twice a month to talk to you guys and kind of share the knowledge that we've learned over the years. And so that's kind of what I view today as, is me taking a few minutes just to share all the dumb things that I did early on, and so you guys don't repeat them. We do this whole series of classes set up just to do that. Like I said at the beginning, I've been doing this for about 30 years. Every single time I do a talk, I learn something new. So that's my goal, is to learn something new, and hopefully you guys can as well. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. We're not scheduled to get through this rapid fire style. So if you have questions, feel free, just raise your hand, interrupt. If you're thinking of a question, so is the person next to you, and if you formulate the question for them, that would be very, very helpful to them as well. So yes.
Where do I get the cheapest pool liner at?
So where do you get a cheap liner at? Well, you can buy a piece of plastic that'll last about 6 months. Yep. So, or if you use the material that we use, we're going to use a 45 mil fish safe EPDM rubber liner that actually has a lifetime warranty from the manufacturer. And we have an entire tractor trailer load and a half of all sizes of rubber liner out back, from anything from a 10 by 10 up to 100 by 150. Yep. And so we can custom cut pretty much any size. There you go. Right. Yep. So we can custom cut any size that you need, that way. So, good morning. Welcome. How are you guys doing? Front row. All right. Be careful there. Yeah. So that's my goal today, is just to answer any questions you guys have about a pond that you have, a pond you're thinking about building. The emphasis today is basically spring cleaning. I'm assuming most everybody in the room has a pond, and all right, I got the pond. What do I do to take care of it? So just by show of hands, confirm that everybody who owns a pond. Pretty much everybody. Anybody here just looking to build a pond for the first time? You guys, okay, cool. So we'll touch a little bit about our ecosystem ponds and how we construct them. And for the most part, we're going to say, hey, after you construct it, this is what to expect in a typical pond, that way. So, yeah, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. No, it's awesome to see you here. So if you look in our booklets that I handed out, on the very back, anybody need one of these? You guys need one of these? Yep. There you go. Yeah. There you go.
Thank you.
Yep. If anybody else needs them in the back there, so I'm good. Yeah, I think we have them. Yep. So so this little booklet here has on the very back cover, it has all of our classes listed on here. So this is our second class of the season. The first class we went through, actually we walked through step by step how we build our ponds, and so we call that pond design and installation. And this class today is spring pond care. Our next class is going to be a little bit more hands-on. We're going to actually have some rocks and some rubber up front here, and we're going to talk about waterfall construction, as far as how we build our waterfalls. And then May 4th is natural ponds and lakes. So what we're talking about there is large ponds, like acre-sized lakes. When we design and build that type of lake, we're actually using the same ecosystem philosophy that we use to design our 5x5 ponds. So it's all the same thing. It's just a little bit different animal, and we talk in more depth about how to build those and how to take care of those. May, our plants will be in full bloom and lush, and so we'll talk about pond plants. That's always a fun class. We get kind of dirty splitting plants up here and talking about the different plants that you can use in there. And then in September, we talk about fall pond care. So that's kind of our session, through there. So please come, please share the word about our classes. They are free. Jenny, how many pounds of food did we get last time? 64 pounds of food from our last class. When you guys leave today, we're going to take the bucket of food that you guys brought today. We're going to measure them. What is our goal? 1,200 pounds of food is our goal for the year. Last year was... Jenny's full of numbers today. I didn't remember one of them. I remember Jenny's name, so I'm doing good. But our goal is to raise 1,200 pounds collect 1,200 pounds of food for a local food bank. It's part of the way that we can give back to the local York area there. So spread the word, and every time you come to Splash, you don't have to wait for a special event. Bring a can of food. It's going to be awesome. So. Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, let's raise 2,000 pounds of food, right? No, it's just an exciting part of it, that way. So, in addition to our classes, we do have pond parties. So, if anybody ever been to one of our pond parties in the evening? So, some of you, if you've never been, you can ask your neighbors who have been. But live music, a little bit of food, little light hors d'oeuvres, and just hanging out in the garden in the summertime. It's every third Thursday through the summer, and I built this garden as a place for me to come and relax and enjoy it, and I want to share it with you guys. So please come, spread the word about those things. So enough commercials about how much fun we have here. Let's talk about ponds. All right. So on page 4 and 5 in your booklet, let's just start here. You'll see the ecosystem pond graphic in there. How many people's ponds looks like that, where you have a skimmer and a biofalls setup? So it's a typical Splash ecosystem pond. So some of the room here, I would say half of the room there. Before we started building ponds like this, the biggest difference is that we would put our pump on the very bottom of the pond instead of in the skimmer. Who has a pump kind of in the pond instead of the skimmer? So a few of you. Okay. So the difference when it comes to the functioning of the system, I view the skimmer as 90% of filtering the pond. 90%. If you don't have a skimmer, you're the skimmer. So the skimmer is designed to do 90% of the work for you. And so if you don't have a skimmer, you actually have to get in there and get to the bottom of the pond, get the muck and debris out of the bottom of the pond all the time. A skimmer does that for you 24/7, 365. So the skimmer is a great physical filter for the pond, and if you don't have one, I would encourage you to do that. Today's talk is going to talk about spring cleaning and that little bit of extra thing you have to do in the spring. But if you have a skimmer, that really eliminates a lot of work for you. Not 100% of it, but it eliminates a lot of it for you. So the biggest evolution with the skimmer for us came in 1995, 96. Aquascape, one of the largest manufacturers of pond equipment in the world, kind of started mass producing this skimmer unit. And it really revolutionized ponds for us. It allowed us to recognize that ponds can be very low maintenance, easy to own, because they're not a lot of work. And so today there's probably 6 to 7 major manufacturers of skimmers out there. But the idea, and then we have guys come in and study our skimmer and go home and make their own out of a garbage can, which is awesome. On large lakes, we'll actually custom build skimmers, on the side of the pond. But the idea of the skimmer is that you're physically getting that debris out of the pond before it clogs your pump or before it settles to the bottom of the pond. Yes, did you have a question? Yeah.
So the skimmer's more or less like a pool filter.
Exactly. The technology for this came from the swimming pool industry. The other part, if you're looking at building a pond from scratch, like I said, that's 90% of filtering the pond. The other part of it is biological filter. So in the physical filter, we're physically getting the leaves, the twigs, the sticks, pollen. That's huge. Here in a few weeks, the spring flowers are going to start to open. The pollen's going to be all over your car. Well, that pollen is also getting, into your pond. If you don't have a skimmer skimming that off, that pollen is tons of nutrients interacting with the pond system, and it's getting into the pond system. And so we have to deal with that, otherwise, if you don't have the skimmer. But with the skimmer, it skims it right off the surface. So if the skimmer is physical filtration, and that's 90% of it, the other 10% is your biological filter and your plants in your pond. And so I'll just briefly touch on those two things. The biological filter is basically a hidden filter in our systems here, full of filter mats, lava rock, bio balls, bio ribbon, bio blocks, any kind of nooks and crannies to grow beneficial bacteria and enzymes. Those beneficial bacteria and enzymes are living in there. I call it a little bacteria house. They're sitting in there having their bacteria party. And along comes some clean water that has no debris in it, but it has high ammonia in it from the fish waste or the organic debris that's breaking down in the pond. So that first type of bacteria there loves ammonia, and it consumes all that ammonia up. And if the ammonia is all gone, your fish are happy. If the ammonia is in the pond, and high ammonia levels will kill fish. So the very first thing that we want to do is get rid of that ammonia out of the water system, and the easiest way to do that is beneficial bacteria and enzymes. So so the bacteria are living on those nooks and crannies in that biofilter, and they're consuming all of that ammonia. The byproduct of that process, that reaction, is nitrites. So if you've ever seen a pond where the fish are maybe swimming around, they seem kind of happy, but the water is pea soup green. Anybody ever see a pond like that, right? Pretty much every hand that goes up. The reason that's happening, and if you go to Europe, like, I'm actually heading to France this summer. I'm excited. But, we're going to go see Monet's garden where he did all his painting and stuff like that. But if you've ever been there, the water's green. The lilies are beautiful, but it's green water, and the fish are happy. It's just us, crazy Americans. We want happy, healthy fish and crystal clear water. So the way that we get crystal clear water is that we have our filters that are large enough to grow another type of bacteria that will consume those nitrites. So remember back to our science lesson, the ammonia gets converted into nitrites. If the cycle stopped right there, those excess nitrites are in the water. And the reason that water is green is because there's a single cell algae that eats the nitrites. In our systems, if you see our ponds, they're crystal clear. We're not doing much of anything other than putting a huge biological filter on there to grow enough. Do I have to start over here, Jesse? Yes. All right, so we're going to start over at the beginning. We're good. So if my biological filter is big enough and I'm growing and I have enough room to have that extra type of beneficial bacteria in there, that bacteria will eat up those nitrates. So in essence, I'm starving the green water algae. So that's why my ponds are crystal clear. It's not because I'm dumping chemicals in there or I'm using UV filters or anything like that, which we don't do. We're just growing enough bacteria. So the biological filter, just to review, gets rid of the ammonia, and it also gets rid of the nitrites. So happy, healthy fish, crystal clear water. It's Mother Nature. It's nothing magical that we're doing other than having the right size biological filter. And you know how the skimmer plays a role in that? It's the skimmer reduces those nutrients that are even in the system to begin with. So skimmer gets rid of 90% of it. The bacteria in the biofilter is the other part of it. And then the last stage of that is nitrates. So if you've ever seen a pond, happy, healthy fish, crystal clear water, stringy algae just everywhere, scummy algae on the surface. Well, the reason you're getting that scummy algae on the surface or that stringy type algae is because of the excess nitrates that are produced by your biofilter. So if I ever stop by a pond and I see the fish are happily swimming around and the water's crystal clear and you've got string algae, a little bit of fuzziness on the rocks, that's a happy pond to me. That is totally normal. We want to see that. Now, I always get the pushback. Well, Mark, that's fine, but I don't want to see this stringy, fuzzy algae anywhere. We've built some projects at restaurants or hotels, and that's what they say. A corporate hotel guy calls me and says, Mark, whatever, your little spiel about natural whatever, we don't want to see it. And so my first line of defense is plants, more plants. So the nitrates, if you go and buy lawn fertilizer at Lowe's today and go home and spread it on your lawn, one of the ingredients in a lawn fertilizer is nitrates. So nitrates is a plant fertilizer. So if you look at all of our ponds in season, and the irises are blooming, the lilies are blooming, All these different plants are looking nice and lush. They are using nitrates. And so my first line of defense against stringy fuzzy type algae is add more plants. If you have a plant that has a round leaf, that's going to take out a different nutrient than a plant that has a tall spiky leaf like an iris. A pink flower is going to take out a different nutrient than a white flower. A tropical that starts blooming in June and blooms until September that has a purple flower is going to take out a different nutrient than like a marsh marigold, which is starting to bloom right now and blooms until like May. So varieties of plants not only look awesome, right, in the ponds, but they serve a role in that they suck out all the nutrients, in essence, trying to starve the stringy fuzzy type algae. Yes. Yep.
It's not uncommon to see a lot of algae this time of year, since our plants haven't had a chance to.
Exactly. Yep. Absolutely. So
Once we get the plants generated, will the algae automatically go away, or do we need a little pump?
Yeah. So he makes a great point, and I'll repeat it in case anybody didn't hear it. So right now, our office is overloaded with phone calls like, Mark, I got string algae coming out the wazoo. What do I do about this stuff? And my first response is, enjoy it. It's springtime in the pond. Because there's excess nutrients that are there now because your plants are still kind of sleeping. So as your plants start to wake up, they're going to start to suck out all those nutrients out of the system. So it should definitely start to reduce on its own as your plants start to come up. And a newer pond, with freshly planted plants, those plants aren't really, part of the system yet. They're still kind of small, so a smaller plant takes a little bit more time to grow, and the bigger the plants get, the more nutrients they can take out. So I always view a pond as like a wine that's aging. It's better with age. Yes, yeah.
My string algae started in early February this year.
Yeah.
I've never seen it better.
Okay. Totally normal, and a lot of people are like, well, my pond is in full sun, my pond is in full shade. It's interesting because the stringy algae really doesn't care too much. As long as it has just a tiny little bit of sunlight, it can grow in full shade. We have some customers who the only time of year they ever get stringy fuzzy type algae is going to be the dead of winter, like under the ice. And it's like, wow, that's kind of strange that it's growing under the ice, but that's the only time of year they get it. Other times, it's this time of year is a very common time. Other ponds, it's the fall. That the only time of year is when the plants kind of start to go dormant in the fall. Then I get some stringy fuzzy algae. So every pond is a little bit different. But yeah.
I mean, are there not any organisms to select from to put in there that can take care of that over the winter?
Yeah. Yep. So the question was, so is there anything that we can do, like a natural organism that would eat that stringy algae in the wintertime and that type of thing? And in my experience, not really. It's just part of the seasonal cycles of owning a pond, that you're going to get stringy algae levels come up a little bit and go down a little bit throughout the season. So a little bit of it is totally normal. Yeah.
Speaking of stringy algae,
Yeah.
that we have an abundance of,
Yeah.
can you share a little bit about what doing a deep clean of the pond does? Does it take out all the algae? Does it grow?
Yep. Absolutely.
Deep cleaning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm going to jump on that. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute, because we're going to jump through the whole process of what we do on that. But that's an awesome question. So awesome. So good. So the idea is just, if we understand that string algae is totally normal, and plants are the way to get rid of those nutrients, and our goal is to starve that algae. That's the first way to do it. Now, all of that being said, is there an organism that can help us out? Is there something natural that can help us out a little bit? Yeah. So understanding that whole ecosystem, if you have done all of that and you say, Mark, I don't have physically room to put any more plants, in my pond, but I'm still getting a little too much string algae, in there, or hey, I've got a party coming up in 2 weeks, and the pond has to look awesome, for the party. And I just want to polish up that little bit of fuzziness that's on the waterfall and that type of thing. We do have available to us some powders that you can sprinkle down on there. This product here is called SAB. It used to be called String Algae Buster, and then they changed the name to SAB. Labeling laws and the EPA were involved in that label decision there. Here's another product called Echo Blast. Both of these products are contact algaecides, meaning that if you have a little bit of fuzziness on the rocks and you just follow the label instructions, unlike I'm going to tell you right now, if you just sprinkle a little bit of that, on the algae itself, like anywhere that you see the algae there, you just sprinkle it down and it touches the cell wall of the stringy algae, it actually bursts it, boom, kills it. The reason this is not my first line of defense is now all of a sudden you killed all that algae and you think you did a great job, but where did that algae go? It's dead algae in the bottom of the ponds becoming nutrients for next week's algae. So this week you're coming in to buy a bottle this big, the next week this big, and then the next week, this big, and then, you're spending more on algaecides than you are on, anything else. And it's not a very natural approach. So I always view these things as polishes after you've maxed out all the plants. So these are fantastic little touches to just polish it up, right before, hey, I went in there and I planted the pond up, but I have a whole bunch of people coming over and I just don't want to have that, on the waterfall, whatever. Using this is a great way to do it. Once a month or something, sprinkle that on there. If you own a hospital or a restaurant, and you just, hey, I don't want to see this ever. We have some electronic devices that I don't have out here right now. One's called an ion gen, and it has these two probes that stick down in the water, and it drips a little ion into the water, and it creates a water condition that the stringy fuzzy type algae just don't like. Again, that's not my first line of defense. I want plants. I want the whole ecosystem thing going and everybody's happy first, and then we can use that as a polish. So those are things that we do put on some of our commercial projects, and a lot of residential customers love them, as well, that way. The last thing I'll mention about stringy fuzzy type algae is barley. Anybody ever put barley in their pond? Okay. Did anybody love putting barley in their pond? Was it helpful or kind of Yeah. What? How did it do? Yeah. Okay. So the mixed reaction that I'm getting throughout the room is very typical. I usually tell people when we first started using barley, because someone in England noticed, that the cornfields, their ponds, the big huge farm pond in the middle of the cornfield, had a lot of algae in it. But the barley field right next door had no algae in it. And so wait, something's up with barley. And so people would start taking barley bales and throw a barley bale in the pond. And some people would see results like, hey, I used to have string algae and now I don't. And what they've determined, to make a long story short, is as the barley breaks down, it does emit a chemical that inhibits the growth of algae. It does nothing about our ammonia nitrate cycle, the whole thing. But it did emit a chemical. And so early on, when we used to sell barley bales in the store, what we discovered is that maybe 10% of the time it was effective. But people would always ask for it and we'd try it. But what we found is that more often than not, it actually made the problem worse, because remember, the whole point of the skimmer is to get organic debris out of the pond. And here we are throwing a huge barley bale into the pond. So it wasn't very effective and it made the problem worse sometimes. The barley, community said, what, all right, we can make this a little bit better. So they started processing the barley, made it into pellets. And so now we sold the pellets. And now all of a sudden that percentage, remember it was like 10% of the people said it liked it. Now it's like 20% of the people liked it. It's still not, odds are not in our favor. So 80% of the people said it had no effect or made the problem worse. Now if you see on the shelf in here, we actually sell an extract, just the liquid, just the good stuff that's doing, the job that barley does. And even with that, in my experience, it's about half and half. Half the people said it had no effect or made the problem worse, and half the people said, yeah, it actually does. So it might be worth a try, to grab a bottle of our barley extract and put 10 pumps in your pond once a week and see if that is an effective solution for you. I don't know exactly what the modality is and what the secret ingredients are for the people that this actually works for and what they don't. It's all over the place. Some of those ponds are in full sun, some are super shady, some are 30,000 gallon systems, some are 3,000 gallon systems. So I haven't seen any consistency in, it'll definitely work in this pond situation and not this one. But barley is another weapon in the arsenal, that way. Yes? Yeah.
How do you feel about blue water treatment?
So, great question. So we sell pond dye in here, so blue pond dye. Our most popular one is actually called Black Diamond. and it's actually a very, very dark blue, almost black. And then I think we still sell a bottle called Pond Tint, which makes your pond kind of brownish. And so all three of those are sunlight inhibitors. So they inhibit the sunlight getting into the pond. It is a little bit of effect. It has a little bit of an effect to reduce, algae in through there. But in my personal experience, I don't want to darken my water. I want my water crystal clear so I can see the bottom. And so, right, I have a buddy of mine in New Jersey has a fantastic business, similar to what we're doing here. But he has a lot of his customers that love red mulch with tidy bowl blue ponds. It just drives me nuts. But that's everybody has their personal preference, through there. But the red, I can't get the pictures out of my mind. But yeah, so the role that dyes play in the water is a sunlight inhibit, but what I found is that if you have ample physical filtration with the skimmer, and you're doing a fantastic job on a biological filter, a dye is not going to be, it doesn't really have a big benefit to you. Yes.
So what, all these inhibitors, what does that do to your aquatic life, like tadpoles and frogs?
Like the sunlight blocker?
The algae being destroyed.
Yeah, exactly. So frogs, tadpoles, all the microorganisms that are in here. Most of the time we're talking about fish. Sometimes we're talking about frogs, but most of the time we're talking about fish happiness and things like that. But everything else that goes along with that. If we're physically filtering it, biologically filtering it, and not adding anything else other than our beneficial bacteria products, your fish are going to be happy, your frogs are going to be happy, your tadpoles are going to be happy. Anytime you start interfering, with the natural process, I worry about, how happy are the tadpoles? How happy are? I had some dragonfly larvae in our pond the other day. In our lily tank, we saw a whirligig beetle the other day. Anybody ever see one of those? They're really cool. They're about like that big, and they have these long front arms that they use to kind of swim with. And if you look up how they swim underwater, because they can live above water or underwater, when they're above at the water surface, they actually create a little air bubble, and they carry that air bubble with them to breathe. Fascinating stuff. But those kind of animals and that kind of ecosystem and that kind of fun in the pond is not going to be, as happy as they want to be if we start, really going the chemical route, this way. Yeah, exactly. They will never show up. Exactly. Yeah. So to me, that's half the fun of the pond. Yes, sir.
You have a skimmer, is the biofilter necessary?
So if you have the skimmer on your pond, that's going to do 90% of the filtration, that way. If you don't have a dedicated biofilter, guess what? You still have biological filtration happening in your pond. Every square inch, every nook and cranny in your pond is going to be supporting beneficial bacteria. The role that the biofilter plays is that it just concentrates that in one spot, and it makes you grow enough. Remember, we talked about European ponds versus American ponds. Their biological filters are probably about the size of this, whereas an American biological filter is the size of this. So yeah, I'm growing some beneficial bacteria in here. We see a lot of other brands filters, biological filters, come through the store, or if we're doing a renovation or something like that. And the biggest thing that I see is just the physical size of those filters is just not growing enough bacteria to handle the fish population. So that's the biggest thing I see that way. We do have a lot of people come in on a budget and want to do a pond themselves, and they look at, the cost of the system, and it's like, I just can't afford to do everything at once. So I'm only going to do half of the filtration system that you recommended. So my recommendation is do the skimming filtration first, and then go back later and add more biological filter. So at least the skimmer is getting 90% of that stuff out of there. If you do biological without doing skimmer, well, guess what? All the debris is going to be clogging your biological, and it's useless. So definitely do it that way. So if that makes sense that way. Yes. Is it too early to do plants? It's never too early to do plants. However, if you come to Splash today and look at our plant tables, you're going to buy like a pot that looks like it has dirt in it. You're like, I paid what for this? So if you go in a greenhouse, they're starting to push, but that's the biggest thing. So we're looking at probably in another 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we'll and maybe even sooner than that, depends on what the temperature's like. So, yeah, so in 2 weeks, with this selection on the plant table, start looking awesome, and within a month, we'll have probably 250 different varieties of plants out there. So. I think it's too early to add fish. What was the conversation inside the store about fish? Maybe in another week or so, or are they starting to sell them? Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, Becky is probably, what we're looking for on fish is that the tank temperatures are about the same as our outside pond temperatures. And so 55, 60 degrees is what we're looking for on that. So if we're having water temperatures consistently 55, 60 degrees in your pond, yeah, we'll probably be okay. What I don't want to do is take a fish that's been hanging out in this 60 degree temperature and just throw him in 30 degree water. It'd be very stressful for him. So that's what we're waiting for on that. Yes, yeah.
Before you leave the biofilters,
Yes.
how often do you replace the bio balls?
Okay, great question. So the question is, in our biofilters, our typical construction is a biofilter here. It has a swirl chamber on the bottom and then some filter mats. And then above the filter mats is either lava rock or bio balls and that type of thing. And the question was, well, how often do we replace, the parts, inside here? On our biofilters, the outside shell is a lifetime thing. So you never ever replace that. The filter mats in here, depending on the style of the filter mat, you usually get 3 to 5 years out of these filter mats through here. And the way you determine whether it's time to replace them is we tell you never to touch that biofilter. But the reason that you would touch them is just in the springtime. Just pull it up just real quick and just rinse everything out. Because in the wintertime, things kind of get a little dormant and things, and so debris could build up. So pull those out. When you pull those out in the spring, you'll see are they falling apart, are they shrinking a little bit. If they're shrinking, instead of the water going straight up through those filter mats, the water will sneak around the edges. If the water's sneaking around the edges, you're not getting the biological filtration out of them. So just take a look at them. Every 3 to 5 years, typically, you'll start to see that. They're shrinking, they're getting real super thin. When you touch them, they just fall apart. So every 3 to 5 years, replace those filter mats. The bio balls, you should never have to replace them. It's a solid, heavy-duty plastic thing that you should never have to replace them. Lava rock, which we used to use pretty consistently. Now we do bio balls. They used to say, every 3 to 5 years, really rinse those lava rock down because they'll start to get clogged up. That's kind of personal preference. If we're building today, we typically use bio balls. But I find lava rock just as effective in that filter. And I personally don't see any reason ever to replace bio balls or lava rock. So if that makes sense. Cool. All right. So we ran through this whole thing. Any other questions on skimming, physical filtration, or how we typically have our ponds constructed like that? Yeah, go ahead.
Do you inoculate those filters in, or do they put bacteria and things kind of show up?
Yeah, great. So when we build a pond from scratch, and you see all the biological filters on our shelf in here, they're factory fresh. There's no real bacteria in there. We definitely have a starter bacteria in here, and this is a fast-acting bacteria. So once we put 10 squirts in the skimmer pump is going to pump it around into the biological filter. This bacteria starts growing right away, very quickly. So right after the spring clean out, and we're going to go through step by step the spring clean out procedures here, the pond starter bacteria should go in, right away. Anytime that you clean that biological filter, you're really destroying all this bacteria that we spend all this time building up. And so we recommend never touch that biological filter except for once a year. Just once a year, just pull those up, gently rinse them down, and put them back down in. After you do that and you fire your pond system back up, the next thing to do is your pond starter bacteria. So it's a great way to get it off to a quick start. And I'm going to talk more about bacteria here in just a minute that way. But great question that way. All right. Any other questions on how this system works? Or good to go? Yeah, go ahead.
One more.
No, you're good.
Okay, so our waterfall, I noticed yours really flow beautifully. Ours kind of is more of a trickle. Is there any way to up the waterfall to make it
Okay.
flow?
Has the flow reduced since? So it's.
It's because we haven't done the spring.
Yeah. So a lot of times, and did you leave it running all winter? Or? Yeah. Okay, so you left it running all winter. So a lot of times, and the great lead in, and now let's start talking about what we do during our spring clean out and why we do a spring clean out. So the skimmer, like we talked about earlier, does 90% of filtering the pond. Some people shut their ponds off in the wintertime. And so you shut off your physical filter. And so the leaves start to build up, the debris starts to build up. And there's a lot, even if you leave your skimmer running, there's a lot more debris late fall and into winter blowing around because your neighbor never cleans up his leaves and all of that issue. Or we built a pond for our church a number of years ago, and there was a big cornfield across the way. And just all winter long, every single Sunday or Saturday afternoon, because, you know, can't wait till Sunday morning, but it's got to look awesome for Sunday morning. We have to go and clean corn cobs out of the pond. You know, high maintenance, you know, but it was more than the skimmer could keep up with. So the fall and winter time is very tough. So our spring clean out, we want to just go in there and just take a look at the ponds. Typically, if you've ignored your pond for the winter time and that, the debris is starting to build up more than normal. In nature, because we're mimicking nature here, in nature, what happens, it snows in the mountains, the snow melts, and the streams and rivers just fill up and they flush all this debris out. That's the concept that we're trying to mimic here when we do a spring clean out. We want to flush out all the major debris. We have a few customers who we build their pond system to be the lowest pond system in the world, lowest maintenance pond system in the world. And every time they get a leaf in there, they're out with a pair of tweezers like, oh, I got a leaf in the skimmer, and they're getting it out of there. Very, very meticulous. If you're meticulous like that, that's awesome. But you probably don't need to do a clean out every single year, you know, because that pond, like you can count the gravel, and some of our customers actually have the gravel numbered on the bottom, you know, and if you're that type of person, you probably shouldn't have a pond, you know, but, did I say that out loud? Everybody needs a pond. All right, corrected myself. But if you're that meticulous, you probably don't have that huge amount of organic mess in the springtime to worry about. So do you have to do a clean out? No, I wouldn't. But I would say every 3 to 5 years, I would do a clean out. Regardless, even if there's never a piece of debris on the bottom of that pond, do a clean out, because we're going to flush out not only all the big debris, we're going to flush out a whole bunch of micronutrients that are starting to build up. This is the lowest pond maintenance system in the world, hands down, no matter what. Physically filtering that pond, 90% of it, biological filter. But you can't ignore it. It is a closed system with living creatures, you know, in there. And so we want to try to mimic nature as much as possible. And so the big first purpose of the spring clean out is to flush it out. Now I'm going to walk you through how it is that we do what we do. When we come out to your pond, and when I say we, I mean the guys who actually set this tent up this morning while I was sitting in the office drinking coffee. I started this business 30 years ago. I put in my time, right? Physically today, I wish I could be out there doing it, but physically today I can't. So, but what we'll do when we come out to clean out your pond, or if you wanted to do it yourself, we'll come out. The first thing we'll do is set up a temporary tank right next to the pond. And we're saving probably about 50% of the water to 70% of the water, depending on how much that is. So, and then some ponds we're saving 20% of the water, but ideally we're saving about half. Let's just call it half. And we're taking your pond water and we're pumping it into that temporary tank. And that's pretty clear water usually, you know. And then we're gonna catch the fish and we're gonna gently move the fish into the temporary tank. We're going to put an aerator in there to keep the oxygen going. We're going to put a net on top of it so that way they don't jump, because fish are like, hey, wait, I'm not in my pond. I want to get back to my pond. I want to jump. So we put the net in, and that just sits there. Now, so we've pumped out half of the water out of the pond. Now we're going to take a pump like this, and you can use your skimmer pond pump. If you were doing it yourself and you don't have a second pump, but if you wanted to get a second pump, this is a great one because it's very low profile, gets very down deep in the water. This will suck up to like a ½ inch of water in the bottom, whereas your pond pump is sitting 2 or 3 inches high, that way. And then this is our pump out hose, so this would just thread into here, and so it's a nice fast pump. That's going to pump the water into the temporary tank. But then we're also taking this hose with this pump with your pond water, and I'm using this as a fire hose, and I'm just going up and down the stream, and I'm just spraying this into all the nooks and crannies around all the rocks. My goal is not to pressure wash the surface of the rock. My goal is to get all the muck and debris that's built up behind the rocks and in the rock and gravel. So if this is all rock and gravel here, I'm spraying this as a volume wash through the rock and gravel. So the rock and gravel is kind of moving and grooving around, and all of that muckiness that's built up between all that rock and gravel, it's flowing right down the stream, back down to the bottom of the pond. So when I'm done washing out that stream and waterfall area, that pond water is looking pretty mucky. So So as I'm cleaning that off, now I'm going to the first shelf in the pond, which is exposed, and I'm doing the same thing, and that pond water is getting muckier and muckier. And then I'm going to slowly start to discharge that high nutrient pond water into the landscape. So if you want to green up your grass, that's the way to do it. Don't go to Lowe's and buy nitrate fertilizer, use your pond water. Or some plant material around there or whatever. And so that's what I'm doing to clean out the pond until I have the pond completely drained out, and everything, all that macro debris is just gone. We did a pond clean out earlier this week, and I bet you it's been 10 years since there was a clean out done. The house was empty for about 2. So we couldn't even get our pond pump in. We put a pond pump in, it floated on the surface with all the leaves, so and when I say we, it was them. So I observed these pictures from my office. But it was 5-gallon buckets, just pond gloves, 5-gallon buckets, just one at a time, and just mucking it out till we actually got it down and we could, there's rock and gravel in here. And it was actually a well-constructed pond. It just had been neglected, for 2 or 3 years, and that. So.
It's better to use existing pond water to flush it out versus fresh water.
Exactly. Yep. And as you can imagine, you've got, we've got, 2 or 3 guys on the crew, so one guy's using this, the other guy actually has the hose, out there. But what we're not using is we're not using the pressure washer, like, the very thin, spray that, just scraping the surface of the stone to get all that, fine biofilm off. When we do this, we're destroying the whole ecosystem of the pond. We don't want to destroy all of it. We just want to get that macro debris out. So a garden hose is fine, but I love the pond water, because the pond water is kind of keeping everybody happy. And the biggest thing is just volume. Even out of a garden hose, it's 3/4 inch, you're not getting much. But this, and even on our crew, we're using 3-inch hose. So this is 1.5 inches. We're using 3-inch. So with 3-inch hose, and I think this week the guys just upgraded a pump. So we're using a 14,000 gallon per hour pump, which on a 3-inch hose, that's a lot of water. I mean, we're just getting a lot of debris, and we're able to move a lot of water very, very quickly on that. But this is sufficient for most size ponds, that way. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Yep.
So once you're done draining the pond with the existing water, you drop that to the bottom, pump the remainder out.
Yep.
You don't have to obsess over rinsing and pumping and re-rinsing. Just let it pump out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I might be oversimplifying it, but they are, rinsing, with the pond water. The pond water is pretty mucky, and then by the time we're done, the garden hose is coming in, and we want no muckiness in the bottom of the pond. So we're slowly diluting all of that with the garden hose and that. So.
But you're not removing all the rocks at the pit.
Nope. So we're moving the gravel around with the volume here, and then we're kind of straightening those as we go. But it is a great opportunity because over winter, freeze thaw, whoops, this rock moved a little bit, let's get that back into place. As I was volume washing, the light popped out, so let me get the light, pushed back into place. When we put the lights in the pond underneath the gravel, the cable might come exposed, so it's a great opportunity to rebury that cable and that type of thing. Yes?
You're doing all that, do you scrub the pots that your plants are in?
Yeah, so great. So great question. So when we're volume washing and things like that, if you have potted plants in the pond, or you're washing, those down. Again, those pots probably have a little bit of biofilm, on the outside edge. I'm not worried about scrubbing that biofilm off. I like that biofilm. All of that being said, if you notice in our diagram here, no potted plants. They're all planted down in there. So I love, during a spring clean out, the fact that I don't have to lift my plants out of the pond and put them back down in. They're planted right down in there in plant pockets, which is a great segue to, all right, so if they're down there in plant pockets, what's my maintenance in the spring for those guys? And so if we have a lily on a shelf and he's in that plant pocket through there, and you remember from last year that that lily was just getting a little too big for its britches, kind of growing outside of that original plant pocket. My gravel on the bottom of the pond is only about like that thick. So I just reach my hand underneath that gravel, grab that rhizome for that lily, and just break it off. Now I'm back to my original plant pocket, lily that way. And now I have a lily rhizome that I can sell on eBay or save it for my next pond, that type of thing. But But so plant maintenance, with the plant pockets is a lot easier, in my opinion, than raising and lowering, pods. So a plant pocket can be as shallow as like 2 inches. When you're digging the pond, you're gonna, dig a little indentation into the soil, and then push that liner down into that, and then the soil that you get from the plant, when you buy it, that fills that pocket. Occasionally on a larger pond, we're going to do large plant pockets. So a plant pocket there could be like 5 foot by 2 foot, totally filled with soil, and then we go in and we bare root plants. Anybody know that there's a new hospital being built in town? Everybody? Yeah? Everybody excited about it? Yeah? Yeah? We're doing a pond out there. It's 90 feet long by 20 feet wide, I think. So something like that. And so we're doing plant pockets out there, and it's going to be the coolest hospital ever. Even if you don't have to go to the emergency room, just hang out in the garden. I give you my permission. Is that okay? All right, go. So the plant pockets out there, I think we're going to have about 100 different lilies out there, and some of them are going to be grouped up into these groups. So trying to mimic Monet's mix of lilies that way. And so they're going to be designed, that whole shelf. I want that whole shelf just packed with lilies on it that way. So it's going to be super, super exciting. But we're going to do that same thing with all the plants around there. So on a larger pond, bigger plant pockets. On a smaller pond, smaller plant pockets that way. So, so good. So where were we? Any other questions so far? Good. Okay, so that's the idea, is that we're flushing all of this out. And then now we're okay. It looks pretty clean. We rearranged our rocks. We adjusted our rocks. We checked our lighting system. We got to replace that light, or we got to get that put into there, or different things. Oh, you know what? I didn't have a fish cave when I built my pond. Now's the time to do the fish cave. Or I didn't put a skimmer on when I built my pond. Now's the time to do a skimmer. Get a skimmer in there while the water levels drain down. So now everything is kind of all right. We're flushed out. It's time to refill the pond. So I'm going to take the pond water that we saved in that big tank. I'm going to pump that back into the pond. I'm going to gently transfer my fish. So my fish are still in that same water. So we're keeping the stress levels as low as we can for the fish. And then I'm going to put my garden hose back in the pond and fill it up that other 50% or that other 30%, whatever it turns out to be. If you are on York water, who's on York water, all right? So York water, chlorine, chloramines. The chlorine and chloramine levels are poisonous to your fish, even at small levels. Municipal water systems tend to spike that every once in a while if they need to flush out a line or something like that. For us, it's not at levels that bother us, but for fish who are hypersensitive to that, it's very, very important that we get rid of those chlorine and chloramines. So hopefully, yep, there we go. Pond Detoxifier, this pond detox product, gets rid of chlorine and chloramines instantly. So when you do this water change, please dose with the pond detox. You should also have a bottle of this on hand at all times, because if you owned a pond for any number of years, you're going to realize that you forgot and left the garden hose in, and you're poisoning your fish every time you put your garden hose in. If you leave that run overnight and do more than like a 50% water change because you left the hose in, you could kill your fish. And I speak from personal experience. I've done it, and it's not fun. But if you have pond detox on hand, you can instantly dechlorinate the water and save your fish. So always have a bottle of this sitting on hand, that way. And I'll say one last thing on the pond detox: double the dosage rates when using the pond detox if you're on York water. We've seen chlorine levels spike to the point where they get beyond the capacity of the regular dosage of this. So it doesn't hurt to double the dosage rates of that. So that definitely, so pond detox as you're refilling it, yes?
Chlorine, doesn't that off gas after like a day or two or something?
So the question is, does chlorine off gas? And the answer is yes, technically on a chemical level, but it's not really the chlorine that we're worried about as much as the chloramines. Yeah, chloramine is basically just an added molecule onto the chlorine, so it doesn't off gas. So it stays, in the water system longer, which is great if you own a water company and you don't want, poisonous things getting in your water or dangerous things growing in your water, but it's terrible for fish. So
Aeration of waterfalls, open fountains help that process?
it helps the chlorine, but it won't do anything for chloramines. Yeah, you kind of it's the oxygen just really is not enough to just break open the chloramine. So yeah, so that's the important part of it, that way. So good. All right. So we talked about SAB. We talked about that. Let me go back on plants just a second. So before you refill your pond, or if you listen to me now, you got to drain your pond again. Fertilizer tablets. So our lilies love fertilizer. The more fertilizer you can give them, the more leaves they're going to grow, the more flowers they're going to grow. A lot of the other marginal plants that we have don't fertilize them. So be careful what plants you fertilize. If you fertilize an iris, it's going to be super leggy and just get too big. An iris doesn't need any help. A lily, on the other hand, I love fertilizing. So when the pond is drained down, grab a fertilizer tablet, push it right down into that soil in that plant pocket, or if you're still in containers, same thing, just push it right down into the container, that way, and that'll get your lilies off to a great start, that way. So don't forget about the fertilizer that way. So all right, so makes sense so far? Good. Okay. So so now your pond is filling back up. You're sitting there enjoying it, and your fish are like, all right, thank you for my clean pond. And you're like, okay, guys, you want to eat? And so the question is, when do we really want to start feeding the fish? Is it right away? And so the idea is have a thermometer, check the water temperature, and again, 55 to 60 degrees is kind of the magic temperature. 55 to 60 degrees, the fish metabolism is starting to come back alive. Your beneficial bacteria is starting to do its thing and that type of thing, and you can start introducing a spring or fall formula for the fish. The biggest difference between our summer high growth formula and our spring and fall formulas is the spring and fall formulas move through the fish's system pretty quickly. There's not as much protein and that type of thing, but it moves through their system pretty quickly. What we don't want is a really high protein heavy food sitting in their gut when the water temperature is 55 or 50 degrees, because they can't process it. They don't have stomachs like we do. It just kind of sits in there and it could rot and cause some problems. So we want to start off with a food that just goes super fast through their system, kind of starts to introduce food back into their systems, starts to get a little bit of nutrients back into their systems that way. Cheerios is another great food. If you've ever, if you want to try different things to feed your fish, love Cheerios. That's a great early or fall, treat, for them as well. Our koi crunchies are fantastic. They're actually pretty high in vitamin C, which is happy and healthy thing for the fish. The other thing to keep in mind about fish in the springtime and coming out of winter, remember the bacteria, kind of dies down in the winter. So the fish kind of go dormant in the winter. But there's some bacterias and all these other pathogens that could be starting to come alive this time of year. And if the fish aren't quite as active, because they haven't been eating and things like that, and then all these pathogens, and then the water temperature one day is 60 degrees and the next day it's 20. This is all stressful things, for the fish. And so a lot of people have gotten into the habit of their first round of food for the spring is a probiotic food. This is a food that's going in. The fish are slowly starting to get acclimated, but this is going to be something that helps their metabolism and helps kind of get their immune systems built back up so they can fight off some of these other things. So consider the probiotic plus food. It's what we start off our fish in the spring outside here with, and it just helps them, gives that extra little boost to help fight off all the stress of life. Yeah. Do you need to feed the fish? So believe it or not, how many people feed their fish? Yeah, so most of the room, right? So it's definitely for us, because I love feeding the fish. But I do have customers that have never fed their fish. So they have a small pond with some goldfish in there, and there's enough in the nooks and crannies that they could probably survive. If you have koi, all bets are off. You need to feed the koi. There's just not enough. They just need a little bit more that way. So do you have to feed them every day? No. If you go away for a week, you don't have to worry about feeding them too much. But we have people that set up, the koi pond, sitter to come over and feed the fish every single day and things. You can do that, but it's not 100% necessary. But a koi does need some nutrients, to supplement, that way. So, so after we get, through the spring season, then we have our high growth and high color formulas that help pop the colors of the fish out and help them grow a little bit faster and things like that. But to start off the season, our premium cold water food or our probiotic food is an awesome way to get started that way. So, makes sense? Yeah, cool, yes.
If I have an unopened bag of beneficial bacteria
Yeah.
from last year that goes on my biofilter,
Yep.
is it still good?
Yeah. So the question is, on our bacteria, you'll notice that all of our bacteria products do have an expiration date. If it's a decent quality bacteria, it will expire because it's live, active, bacteria. So take a look at, if you have some leftover from last year, use that up first, before you buy new. But look at the expiration date. If it's last year or, it should be, I think it's like a 2-year expiration date or something like that. So use up what you have first. It doesn't get any fresher than that. But you guys have a dosing system, right? Yeah. So we talked about adding that starter bacteria to the pond. And that's going to be that fast acting, boom, let's get the biofilter inoculated, let's get the biofilter started. Now what? So now what do we do? And the pond is starting to come back alive and things like that. We do recommend adding just a tiny little bit of beneficial bacteria consistently. Every single week, add just a little bit of bacteria. All of our bacteria bottles come with a little pump top, and it's 1 pump per 100 gallons, so it's very, very easy to dose, with that. And if you're doing that, if you have a 1,000-gallon pond, you're just going out and putting 10 pumps of this in once a week, it's a great way to make sure you're always adding just a little bit of fresh bacteria. The fresher, the better, and the more frequently, the better. A few years ago, Aquascape came out with an auto dosing unit. So instead of once a week putting 10 pumps in of the bacteria, the dosing unit does, and I haven't done the exact math, but I'm going to say 1,000 microdoses every day. So it's just a little bit, tiny little bit, always getting just a little bit of fresh bacteria in the water there. So in the dosing units, most of the time, most people are using this Maintain product, which is a beneficial bacteria with a few other special added ingredients, and it's a great way to just automatically do it. It's not a whole lot of work to go out to the pond and put 10 pumps in once a week, but why do that when you could just automatically just have it done for you? And so on the bag itself would have the expiration date on there. So just make sure you're good, and then use that up. Just use it up. And if it was 2 years old, or if it froze, I would say, it's probably kind of worthless. And the way I would dispose of it, I would just put it all in the pond, just at once, and then come get a fresh bag. So yeah, yes.
Back up, you talk about coming into spring, starting up again.
Yep.
What are your feelings on total pump shutdown during the winter and leaving? I've heard mixed stories both ways.
Yes, so come to our fall seminar and we'll talk about that. You have to wait. No. So I personally love listening to my waterfall all winter long. So at my house, my main waterfall is right outside my bedroom window. And so even in the dead of winter, my window's cracked open. I mean, there's snow coming in my window, and the wife's like, shut that. I was like, no, I can't hear the waterfall. So I love the waterfall in the wintertime. So I would say it used to be 70% of our customers kind of followed that same thing. They left everything running. The past few winters, this winter actually wasn't too bad, but previous to that, there was a few winters right in a row where it was like just miserable. That it just got so cold for so long. People were having to add a little bit of water and just dragging that garden hose out for the 3rd time in the dead of winter. It's kind of a pain in the neck.
One being you don't want to run because you don't want that cold water on top going to the bottom where the fish are in the winter.
Right. Yep.
And the other thing, and I've known people have done this, if they're not paying attention, you start freezing their falls, they have pumped their ponds dry because the water gets over the ice and leaves the pond.
Exactly. Yep. So those are 2 great issues, and so for those reasons and a few others, people are like, you know what? Just come. As soon as Thanksgiving comes around, let's just plan to shut it down. So that way, I don't have to worry about. I want to go to Florida for a month, and I don't want to have to worry about the pond. So if you do shut it down, the biggest thing we're worried about keeping the fish happy for the winter time is just gas exchange. So your fish kind of go down, they're in their fish cave, and they're not quite dormant, they're not quite hibernating. They go into a state called torpor, which is pretty much hibernation, but they're kind of just hanging out down there. They're living and breathing, so they're still exhaling. If that top of the pond surface gets totally iced over, those bad gases can't get out and they suffocate. So
Use the aerator, and then they use the surface ice melter.
the de-icer. Yep. Yep. Yeah, exactly.
4 inches of ice on top with a hole.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, exactly. So a lot of times our most popular product that people come in the wintertime and ask for is a heater. But I always caution people, a heater by itself does not disturb the water surface enough to always get the bad gases out. If you put a big enough aerator in, it's the bubbles of the air, actually is enough to keep a hole in the ice and disturb the surface, getting the gases out. So always an aerator, and sometimes if you have a heater, fine, throw that on top too. So.
Down, do you put the aerator?
So the aerator, great question. So I don't want to put it on the very bottom, because I want them to be just happy in their little, undisturbed surface, water down there. So usually about 8-10 inches. Yeah, it's just enough that we want to keep the surface hole open, to get the bad gases out. Yes. So so the question is, do you install the aerator year-round or just the wintertime? We are actually starting to install that aerator for year-round use. Because we find, like in our ponds out here, you'll see aerators running here now, and they'll stay running all summer long. Your fish can never have too much oxygen. Your beneficial bacteria process needs oxygen to work, so that's the role of our waterfalls, so they add oxygen. So if we have aerators in there, supplemental oxygen, that's a great thing. If your pump dies, Murphy's Law says it's going to die on the hottest day of the year, or the coldest. So it's either chainsawing a hole in the ice, or it's super, super hot. Hot water holds very little oxygen, or less oxygen. So if you have that supplemental aerator, if your waterfall pump goes out, you're gonna have a good backup, through there. So make sense? Yeah. Cool. All right. What other questions? Good. Okay. Yeah.
When it's warmer,
Can you mix different kinds of fish? Yeah, absolutely. So if you notice in our fish tanks in here, we have koi, shabumpkins, comets, all those different types of goldfish, and we also have catfish. In season, we have a pond shark. So he's not technically a shark. He's a really docile, more of an algae eater, but he has a really high fin, and he looks pretty menacing, coming across there. So there's a lot of different types of pond fish. When we do our large lakes, we're doing bass and bluegill and catfish and minnows and all that kind of stuff there, there too. So. Yes. Yep. All of those are hardy, type fish. We do sell an orf. Anybody have any orf in their ponds? Okay. So an orf is it's like a carrot, colored shaped looking fish, and they're awesome to school around together. So an orf is another type of fish, that way. The biggest piece of advice, if you're going to do multiple types of fish like that, is make sure they're all about the same size. I've seen orfs this big eat, koi this big, and I've seen catfish this big eat other fish this big. I followed up with my personal pond is all koi. I don't have any goldfish, and I don't have any other types of fish in there. I like koi babies, and if I have multiple types of fish, if I have goldfish in there, if I have catfish, or I have orfs, I'm not going to get koi babies. If you're in a situation where you have too many koi babies every single year, get a few orfs, and you will never have any babies in your pond again. So that's but have fun with it, and that. So, all right, good. Well, I think I'm running low on time here. What other questions did I not answer for you guys today? Yes.
How do I, even if I clean out our pond, how do I get the water flow in the waterfall?
Yes.
Harder?
Yes. So back to that question there. So I skipped a whole huge step in our pond clean out process. So I thank you for pointing that out. So when you have that pond drained down, your pond pump, is probably still in your skimmer. So pull that pond pump out, all the skimmer, components in there, and rinse all those off. I would imagine if your flow has slowed down, it's probably because the pump itself. Can you grab me? I forget it. I was going to say one of our pumps, but I can show you. Our pumps come apart pretty easily, and so you take that cage off the pump there, and then just with a screwdriver with your finger, just reach around the volute and clean all of that stuff out of there. I would imagine you probably got a leaf or two, stuck on that impeller, and that's reducing the water flow. And so if you pull that stuff out, you're going to see that and be able to get that flow going. Yeah.
I purchased a UV filter.
Okay.
But I don't know how to use it.
Yes.
I don't know.
Well, do you see the UV on our diagram there? It's a trick question.
No.
Yes.
So is that
So-
the biofeeder?
So no. So how many people have UVs on their ponds? One. Oh, good. So I can pick on you today. All right. Good. No. So we do sell UVs, and we make a ton of money selling UV bulbs and replacement bulbs and things like that. In our experience, if you have the ecosystem pond set up where it's skimming filtration's doing an awesome job, your bio's big enough, you don't need a UV. The UV is an awesome device. Like if I was in Europe and I had a pond that didn't have any of these filters on it, and I wanted to clear up that green water, what I would do is put a UV filter on there. And as the water passes through that UV, it zaps all of that single cell algae. And so the algae goes in, it dies, and it comes out crystal clear water. So if you have a green pond in full sun and you don't have any of these filters on there, you put a UV on there, man, it looks like it's doing an awesome job, because it is cleaning it up. In our experience, it just becomes redundant that we don't need it on the system here. Do you find that you need your UV or?
Because I have a small pond, I have so much trouble in the spring.
Yep.
The water goes pea soup green.
Yep.
So everything's under control, so it does help.
Yeah. So it definitely does work. Do you think that if you beefed up the other filters that it would reduce it maybe?
That later on.
Yeah. So we do sell it, and there are some applications where the UVs are good, but if you notice in our systems here, we don't have it. And in 30 years of putting in ecosystem ponds like this, we've never felt a need for a UV filter. So anytime anybody comes in and talks about a UV, it's like, yep, that could be the fast solution, but here's a permanent solution. And if you look at the costs, yeah, this. Yeah, right. That is what eBay is for, right? But yeah, this is so much easier, So yeah, awesome questions. Good. What else? I'll stay here and bore you guys all day with stories. What other questions today? Yeah.
The cleaning out my pond, what I have is I have a lot of pine needles.
Okay.
And you can't always get them out.
Yeah.
How detrimental is that?
So pine needles, what's worse than that is actually hemlock needles because they're so tiny and they get in there. That's the purpose of the spring clean out, is just to get as much of that out of there as you physically can. The way I test if a skimmer is actually doing its job on the pond is I'll throw a pine needle in on that far corner of the pond, and if the skimmer's doing its job, that pine needle will work its way to the skimmer. If that pine needle kind of goes to the bottom, I need to beef up my skimmer, either put a bigger pump or a bigger skimmer or something like that in there. So yeah, I mean, our skimmers are designed to handle pine needles and hemlock needles and leaves, twigs, sticks, pollen, all of that stuff. But it has to be, sized right there. So look at that skimming filtration, see if that helps. Yeah.
We have tree roots.
Yes. The birch tree story I tell in a lot of my seminars. Yes.
They suck up all the water in the pond.
Yeah.
They offer any benefits?
So trees, and I'll tell you a quick story about their particular pond. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous setup, but there's a birch tree, or is it 10 feet away? Yeah. Probably the trunk is probably 10 feet away. But based on my experience with their birch tree, I am convinced that plants can actually hear flowing water. That they're not sensing, and I'm serious about it. I think they can actually sense, and hear it flowing water, because it's a rubber liner and the water's on this side and the tree roots are on this side, and the tree roots kind of go up over the rubber liner to get a drink. And it's not that they're sensing moisture and going towards the moisture, because there's no moisture there. So they have an issue. It kind of every year we kind of trim those back a little bit, but the roots go up over top, and they can be very, very thirsty. They can drink a lot of. I mean, it'd be interesting to see how many gallons of water that tree actually drinks. But that way. So that's one detriment of having the tree around there. To me, the beauty of having that tree there outweighs any negative, that way. But I'm not sure what you're. Yep.
Different plants.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I would imagine, if you're talking about like nutrient loads and things like that, I would imagine a birch tree is pulling out some kind of nutrient that something else is not. So other than it drinking 10,000 gallons a day, he's probably pretty helpful to the ecosystem. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't leave the roots there, but that's how I would look at it. Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Yes. Yes. Yep. So remember we talked about the spring clean out, that you're physically getting in there in one time a year, just getting all that muck and debris, out of there. Your pine needles, you're not getting all of those out. You're getting a little bit of debris. You don't have a skimmer, all that muck and debris is built up down there. Your sludge cleaner is an anaerobic type bacteria. This starter bacteria and our maintain is an aerobic bacteria. They live on the oxygen-rich environment of the biofilter. Your sludge cleaner is a beneficial bacteria that lives in the anaerobic zones, the zones in your pond where there's not a lot of oxygen, behind the rocks, where all that sludge is going to be kind of building up. And so what happens with this is you put 10 pumps of this in for a 1,000-gallon pond. It's going to go down into those anaerobic zones, eats away that organic muck, converts it into oxygen and water, just makes it disappear. So it's fantastic, fantastic product. Just like with all of our bacteria products, if you accidentally overdosed with this and dumped the whole thing in, you tripped and fell, you can't hurt the fish. Somebody mentioned Algaecide hurting fish. We don't mention too much about Algaecide up here. Your bacteria products are your friend, so that you can't overdose with them, and it's a natural way to handle that. So, so if you say, you know what, I'm not going to do the pond clean out this year, yeah, use your sludge clean out and see if that helps. Try to build that up. Or throughout the year, if you don't have a skimmer, definitely a sludge cleaner would be your friend. Yep. Cool, awesome, yes. Yeah. And thank you guys for coming. If you have to go, please sneak out, and I'll be here for as long as you want. Yeah. Yes.